Can sine of x be equal to 2? That's what we're gonna find out in this video. Stay tuned. Hi, this is Ash with Math Hero Academy, bringing you yet another interesting math puzzle. You know that sine of a variety of values can be 0, -1, and +1. In this particular video, we're gonna find out the value of x when sine of x is equal to 2. Let's get started. So to calculate sine x is equal to 2, the value of x is going to be a complex number. But let's start actually looking at what the value of cosine of x is going to be. So we know the cosine of x is equal to square root of 1 minus sine x squared, and so we can write this as square root of 1 minus 2 squared, and that's square root of 1 minus 4 or -3, and so we can write this as square root of -3, or just write it as I times square root of 3. Now the next step is to write down the complex number representation of cosine x plus I sine x. We know e power ix is equal to cosine of x plus I sine x. And so that's your first hint. See if you can find out the value of x just using these tips. Okay, we're back now. We've got e power ix is equal to cosine of x plus I sine x. So let's plug in these values here. We've got cosine x to be equal to I times square root of 3, and we've got sine x to be equal to 2. So we write down I times 2 here, and so we've got e power ix is equal to all of this. Now let's take logs on both sides. So we're going to have log of e power ix, and log of e power a is just going to be equal to a. So we can write this just as a here, or ix. And now we're going to take logs on both sides of, we're going to take logs on this right side of this equation. So we're going to get log of I times square root of 3 plus I times 2. And then we can separate this I outside, we can factor it, and we can write this as log of I times square root of 3 plus 2. So we'll just write this as log of I times square root of 3 plus 2. And then using the properties of logs, we can write this as log of I plus log of square root of 3 plus 2. And you're almost done now. All you need to find out is the value of log of I. So what is the value of log of I? And that is your second hint. What is this equal to? So here's the second hint now. Our goal is to find out the value of log of I. And remember, if we can find a value of I, we can represent I as e power IA. Then we are done, because log of I will then just be equal to log of e power IA, which will just be IA, because log of exponent is just this piece at the top. So what is the a for which e power I is equal to I? And that's easy, because we know this guy is equal to cosine of a plus I sine of a. And here we've got just an I here, so sine of a should be equal to 1 and cosine of a should be equal to 0. We know the simplest value for that will be a to be equal to pi divided by 2. So log of I will be e power I pi divided by 2. I need to take a log over here. And so this is just going to be equal to I times pi divided by 2. And so that was the final answer kind of to the previous hint. So let's go back. We've got a lot. ln of I is equal to I pi divided by 2 now. And so we can write this as I pi divided by 2. So we've got Ix to be equal to I pi divided by 2 plus ln of square root of 3 plus 2. And so we can divide by I on both sides here. When we divide by I, this I cancels out and we get a 1 divided by I here. I'll erase these two i's now. And so this is pretty much your answer. X is equal to pi divided by 2 plus 1 divided by I. Now 1 divided by I is equal to negative I, because 1 is equal to negative of I times I, and I squared is equal to negative 1. So you can see this identity holds true. And so you can just write negative I over here. So let's just write a negative I over here. And you're all set. Remember that the cosine of x is the square root of 1 minus sine squared x. So you can also have a negative sign here. In general, you can write a plus minus here, because you can see that when it's squared up, these two will add up to give you 1. So you can just write a plus minus here. You can have a plus minus here. And so in reality, let me just write it down with a different colored pen here. It's all just going to be plus minus here. So wherever you see a square root of 3, you're actually going to have a plus minus here. And so it would be a plus minus here as well. And so your answer is going to be plus minus here. And so your answer is going to be pi divided by 2 minus I times log of plus minus square root of 3 plus 2. Now let's use this simple idea to actually find the value of x, sine x to be equal to a, where a is greater than 1. The absolute value of a is greater than 1. So a can be greater than 1 or less than negative 1. And that's the most counterintuitive, because we are forever thinking that a is going to be between the values of negative 1 and positive 1. So what happens when a is the magnitude, the value of a is greater than 1? So once again, we have this simple idea. We take cosine of x and we write this down as square root of 1 minus a squared, because cosine squared plus sine squared should be equal to 1. So this squared plus this squared is equal to 1, which we can easily see. Now note that because a is greater than 1, 1 minus a squared is always going to be a negative number. And so we can write this as square root of negative 1 times a squared minus 1. And we can further write this as square root of negative 1 times square root of a squared minus 1. Note that because a is greater than 1 here, or absolute value is greater than 1 here, this value here is always positive, and so we're going to have a square, and we always have a square root of negative 1 here. And so you can write this as I times square root of a squared minus 1. Note that as in the previous example, we're going to have a plus minus over here, because you can have both the positive and negative quantities here. And so all of this is going to be plus minus here. So let's just erase this out and write it as an answer right over here. We can just erase all of this calculation and we can just write it right over here, just to save some space, as I times square root of a squared minus 1. And we'll just erase this real quick. Now we're on to the next step. We've got e power I x is equal to cosine of x plus I sine of x. And that is equal to plus minus I times square root of a squared minus 1 plus I times a, which is the original a that we started with. And now we can use the trick that we used earlier. We can take logs on both sides. We've got log of e power ix, and that is just equal to ix. So let's just write down ix here. And on the right hand side, we're going to take logs of this quantity. We're going to take the log ln of plus minus I square root of a squared minus 1 plus ia. Now this looks a little bit complicated, but let's actually isolate this I outside. Let's factor it and bring it out. So we can write this as ln of I times this quantity is going to be, I'll just write down this first, a plus minus this quantity here, square root of a squared minus 1. And now we can use the property of logs. Log of a times b is log of a plus log of b. And so you can write this as log of I plus the log of a plus a squared minus 1. And now we got log of I from our previous example right over here. We know log of I is equal to I pi divided by 2 using this same exact logic. And so we can write this as I pi divided by 2. So let's just write this guy as I times pi divided by 2, and we've got ix here. And now let's divide by I on both sides of this equation. We've got x is equal to pi divided by 2 plus 1 divided by I log of a plus minus square root of a squared minus 1. Remember, we have a plus minus here. I forgot to put a negative sign here. And 1 divided by I will be negative I. So you can write this as negative I, and we're all set. This is a fantastic way to find what the value of x will be for any sign of x. So x is equal to pi divided by 2 minus I times log of a plus minus square root of a squared minus 1. Now if we plug in a to be equal to 2 as in the previous first example, we're going to get x is equal to pi divided by 2 minus I times log of 2 plus minus 2 squared minus 1 is 3, and that's your answer. That's the answer we got. If x were equal to, if a were equal to pi, for instance, then your answer would be x is equal to pi divided by 2 minus I times log of pi plus minus square root of pi squared minus 1. Now here's the challenge for you. For what value of x is sine of x going to be equal to I, which is square root of minus 1? So that's the challenge for you. Post your answers or hints in the comments below so others will know that you're able to solve this. This has been a fantastic way, and I hope you like this example. Please like and subscribe to this channel so I can keep on bringing such interesting articles for you. Talk to you very soon.